So I just want to start by giving you a bit of context for my talk. And first of all, I knew I was going to be following Bill McGill, and I knew Bill was going to go big picture, because A, Bill's a big picture guy, and B, he used Latin in his title, which is a dead giveaway. He's going big picture, right? So I knew that I didn't have to cover some of the ground that Bill was going to be covering in his talk. And secondly, as Newton said, I spent the last 5.5 years in administration, but I wasn't in a leadership role. So when you're an associate dean or a vice provost, the dean and the provost have the big ideas, and as associate dean or vice provost, you have to make them happen. You have to be worried about the nitty-gritty of how things get done. So they think about the future, and people like me try to make that happen. So for my talk here today, that's really what I wanted to focus on, was some sense of the future. I knew Bill was going to be really filling that well, and really more about how we'll get there. And it builds on some of the elements that Bill was talking about, and really some of the distinctions perhaps between soil science as a discipline and soil science as a profession, and trying to understand a bit better perhaps how we can align some of those things over time. So the title is Soil Science Needs to Get Dirtier, and hopefully over time you'll get a sense of what I mean by that. There was supposed to be a fourth speaker today, who was Dr. Hartwig, and who wasn't able to make it. But I wanted to start by reviewing some of the literature, there's not much of it, about the future of soil science, to sort of set a little bit of a context for the direction that the discipline of soil science will be moving in. And this is a paper by Dr. Hartman and Alex McBratney, a very well-known pathologist in geoderma, called the Soil Science Renaissance. And in it they make a few points. First of all, basically that the amount of papers being published in soil science is increasing dramatically over time. So it's just a figure showing the number of publications with soils in the title and the change over time, and going from 1993 to 2007, and a real increase in about the last 5 years for the number of papers being published in soil science. There's lots of activity in soil science. This was looked at again by a paper from people in the States, and Suzanne Allaire from Laval, and again talking about where soil science is going in the United States and Canada. And in this graph, this kind of exemplifies perhaps what Bill was talking about. The closed circles are the number of publications in soil science, again up to about 2005, and you can see really a tremendous increase after about 1995 in the number of publications. And the open circles are the affiliations of the authors, and specifically the affiliation being a Department of Soil Science. So we've had a really dramatic increase in the number of articles published in soil science, but they're increasingly being done by other people who are not in soil science departments. So it really kind of exemplifies that trend that Bill was talking about. There's lots of work going on in soils, but increasingly it's being done by people who are not affiliated with the soil science department. Another measure of activity in the field, this is kind of an odd one, but this is from the Hartwig and Bratney article, but it's the number of report pages of the FAO Human Development Reports. So that's the number of report pages of the solid line, and the bars are the number of times soils is mentioned in those pages. Again, a tremendous feat to amass this data, I would guess, but nonetheless, the number of times soils is reported. And as you can see, I mean, soils is mentioned a whole bunch of times in these reports. And at the highest level then, at sort of the level of FAO and organizations like that, soils is well represented. I mean, there's a real interest, and it's well represented in reports. How that translates into activity is a different question, but nonetheless, it's really well represented in the reports. So they, in their article, they really conclude that there's a soil science renaissance upon us, that over the next 50 years, in fact, the needs of society for soils information will provide tremendous momentum to the field, and there'll be more and more activity in soils, on soils research, albeit much of it might not be done by soil scientists. So just to sort of summarize this in terms of health of the discipline, there is an increasingly number of research articles published about soils. Increasingly, these are not soil scientists in the way we might understand them doing that, but there's a lot of activity, and there's an increasing recognition at sort of the international level of the importance of soil. So this is all good news, I guess, for the discipline of soil science. And even the middle part, of course, I mean, if they did the search for University of Alberta, people would not be associated with the soil science department because it has a different name, renewable resources. So, you know, it's a measure of perhaps almost stagnation if everything was still called the Department of Soil Science. There's been an evolution in what we've called things over time. So lots of good evidence of an increasing interest and activity in soil science. The article by these authors, though, also looked at education and paints a much sort of gloomier picture. So they did 2 surveys, and really what they document is there's a declining number of undergraduate students in soil science, decreasing number of graduate students, and a decreasing number of faculty in soil science. And this is for the United States and Canada, as you can see from the title. So a somewhat gloomier picture, but one that I'm not really sure is as appropriate for Western Canada. First of all, we never had many students in soil science, right? It hasn't changed. I mean, it's been around the University of Saskatchewan. We still have a soil science major. It's been around for many, many years, but it's never graduated many students. And last year it graduated 0, and you can't get lower than that, at least, I guess. You know, we've stemmed the decline, I guess, but you know, really not very many grads. So we never had many students in soil science in Canada. So the decline is really not, you know, I don't know that it's that huge of a deal, because right now I think we're probably teaching more students soil science than ever before. So soil science faculty deliver a tremendous amount of service teaching for other areas now. So at University of Saskatchewan this last year, we were teaching more students soil science than ever before. So if you have 6 majors and that's the only people you're teaching soil science to, it's actually a very small pool to draw from in the future. So through our service teaching, arguably we're informing students about soils more than ever before. And the real challenge, I think, is to sort of communicate that unified approach that Bill was talking about, rather than fragmenting it in the various fields. So there's arguably a tremendous amount of teaching activity in soil science. It's just not at the level of majors and so on. And again, I don't have any real evidence, that's sort of anecdotal, but my sense is, from the national meetings and meetings like this I attend, is that in fact we have very healthy soil science graduate student numbers. And I think there's a bunch of reasons for that, one of which is that young faculty are under tremendous pressure to have lots of students. So there's a reason to bring students into the program. But I don't believe in Western Canada that we have decreasing numbers of graduate students. I think they're actually pretty healthy. And this was a couple of years ago, and this year U of S has the highest number. We have 73 graduate students in our soil science graduate program. It's a huge program, and too big, arguably. But nonetheless, a very significant number of students in programs. So I'm not sure that we're tracking that sort of North American trend in Western Canada. In terms of loss of faculty, there was a period where we lost faculty. I don't have any doubt about that. And it was about the period I was hired in, honestly enough. And sort of the late 80s, early 1990s, I think many Western Canadian departments underwent a contraction. But I think numbers have been quite stable since then. And I've met a couple new faculty in the room here, which is great. And so there is new people being hired. And as well, we have gained faculty at places like the department that Bill founded at the University of Northern British Columbia. So overall, I think in terms of soil science teaching faculty in Western Canada, I would suggest we've stayed about stable. I think it's very different in Central Canada. I mean, I think the Ontario Agricultural College has taken very severe cuts for a whole variety of reasons. And, but yes, I'm primarily focused on Western Canada. So I think overall we've had stable or increasing numbers if we look across the region in terms of faculty numbers. There has been, though, a really substantial loss of capacity at the Federal Civil Service, and especially in the area of soil survey and pedology. And there's been a tremendous loss of people associated with that. You know, severing the head of that unit, in a sense. So that's been a real loss, and there's no way of glossing over that. And I suspect this meeting 25 years ago probably would have had a much greater percentage of federal civil servants, and especially those perhaps in the soil survey associated with it. So there's been a really profound loss of capacity, no question, in the area of the federal civil service. And you know, recently we've seen PFRA become ESB, become Science and Technology Branch, and that's again had a tremendous loss of capacity in terms of applied research and program delivery associated with that. So there are very real changes associated there. So I attended the Bureau of Soil 2012 meetings this summer, and there was an excellent panel discussion there by some very eminent European soil scientists about the connection between soil science and society and where this was going to move to in the future. So, and they felt that in Europe, in the last 5 years, there's been a very major shift in sort of the rhetoric at the national level and international level from environmental protection to food security. So in terms of a major theme, I suspect we're going to see rolling out over the next period of time, it is really aligning soil science much more with food security than with environmental protection, in Europe at least. And this is a big problem for European soil science departments because they detached themselves from agriculture a long time ago and really have very little connection now, many of the departments there, with agronomy or agricultural activity. So that's a real problem for them, and especially Johan Boma from Netherlands, a very smart guy, felt this was going to be a real challenge for European soil science. So food security, this is, the FAO has some great definitions of food security and so on. There's 4 elements to it, and the one that most directly concerns us is the physical availability of food. Is there enough food to feed people with? Economic and physical access to food, I mean, is the food being transported, is it available? Food utilization, and part of that is what Bill was talking about, things like biofortification. You can have the right quantity of food, but as the food does not contain the correct micronutrients and so on, that can lead to health issues. And then the 4th element of food security is the stability of it. So is there a secure year-to-year access to that food, or is it in fact there's periods of boom and bust in the food supplies? So those are the 4 sort of elements to food security. And Saskatchewan has just bought in the food security concept in a big way, in a $50 million way. And so the Potash Corporation has worked with the province to set up a global institute for food security. You may be aware the Saskatchewan government really, in a sense, went to bat for Potash Corp. And the flip side of that is that Potash Corp throws money at everything they can now in the province of Saskatchewan to kind of win back the affection of the Saskatchewan population, I think. So anyways, U of S's share of that penance was the money for the Global Food Security Institute. So at the national level, I think, and Bill gave you a sense why, I mean, the tremendous demand for food calories coming up in the future, biofortification, will really drive this move towards food security, I think really dominating the agenda to a certain degree over the next 50 years or so. So the implications for soil science is that really we deal mostly with the physical availability of food. The crop breeders will deal with the micronutrient and other issues, or perhaps we can through fertilizers, who knows. But really, if we're going to be a player in that, in a sense, we need to maintain a strong link between soil science and agricultural production. So we need to maintain a link with agronomy, which in some cases, as we'll see, has grown perhaps a bit tenuous. So as I say, I think food security is really going to dominate the agenda at national and international levels. And if we're going to be players there, then we also have to be players in agricultural production. So as Ross talked about, the amount of fertilizer research, for example, has declined tremendously over time. And yet that's a very real and applied issue that affects the agricultural sector. So the kind of work we have to be concerned to do more of in the future. And as I mentioned, really this is a big concern in Europe because the money is moving from environment to food security, and that's really isolating their departments, which have severed that link over time. So just to do a quick scan of where the departments are in Western Canada in terms of their link with the agricultural production system, this is just a very simple way of looking at it, which is what programs do the 4 main agricultural universities offer. And I think to a certain degree, the link between agriculture and soils has been, is probably the weakest at the University of British Columbia. They've undergone a very substantial change, I mean, both in the name of the faculty. They no longer offer an equivalent of a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture. It's a Bachelor of Science in Applied Biology. And they have 2 majors there, Applied Plant Soil Science and Food and Environment. But none of them, when you read the course requirements, has much of a link with agronomy anymore. So UBC is probably in Western Canada the department that's gone strongest for that sort of environmental linkage. University of Alberta, of course, has the AILS, I love that acronym for their faculty. Land reclamation is a very important program there, but they still have the Bachelor of Science in Agriculture, and please correct me if I'm wrong, and a Sustainable Agricultural Systems major. However, it didn't seem to have a lot of soil science in it, but I could well be wrong, but it seemed primarily focused on plant and animal production. So that's certainly a link that may have been lost somewhat, which, you know, the being strategic into the future, would argue that we should really reestablish that to a certain degree. University of Saskatchewan is, I think, very conservative at some level in terms of what we do. So we still have a straightforward Bachelor of Science in Agriculture. There's 3 majors that soil scientists participate in: soil science, agronomy, and environmental science. Agronomy is the 2nd largest major in the college, and environmental science is the 3rd largest, animal science being the largest. And soil science would be way, 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 way down the list. I mean, I say with 0 students, you're tied for whatever last place is, right? So, we also have a new program, a Bachelor of Science in Renewable Resource Management, and that has a very heavy field component for soil science in it as well. So that's just the first graduates emerged from that about 2 years ago. So it's a new program, but it has a very strong soil component to it. University of Manitoba, again, has a more traditional type of program, the Bachelor of Science in Agriculture and Agronomy major, and they also have a BSc in Agroecology. And that's a term that's a bit resonant with about 15 years ago in a sense, right? So it always shows you not to adopt sometimes kind of a trendy term because it may not weather very well. And arguably agroecology is one of those names. But their agronomy major there is still very strong. So overall, I think if indeed food security is going to be a very dominant theme in the future, soil science departments or sub-departments in Western Canada are really well positioned, I think, in a sense, to participate in there. So again, that bodes well, I think, for the future in soil science. In terms of larger issues for the discipline, this is a great article, and many of you, of course, will recognize Henry Jansen, a somewhat stark photo, a big brother-ish almost picture there. And Henry, of course, is he's the lead author. I'm afraid it's severed at the top there, but he's actually the lead author of this. H.H. Jansen is just a bit cut off there. And Cesar Zaroldi, who many of you will know had an Alberta link as well. So this is really an excellent article looking into the future for what soil scientists should be concerned about in the future. Okay, and it's really, really well written, and as if you listen to Henry, you'll know he's a very charismatic speaker and almost evangelical in his zeal for soils to be well recognized. So it's an excellent article, and these are the sort of questions which they pose in it. So the food security issue, how can we feed people? Fresh water, the interaction between soils and water that's been highlighted in a couple earlier talks. Nutrients. I mean, how can we continue to produce larger and larger harvests with the existing nutrient pool or enhancing that? Energy, so really concerned with bioenergy and the production of cellulosic lignocellulosic materials for bioenergy. Climate change, how is that going to affect the soils? How will soils continue to produce? Biodiversity at every level is a very significant issue, and I love the biodiversity because it has the word fructus in it, which is certainly Henry Jansen's. I got to say, I've never heard anyone else use the word fructus in any setting. So that must be Henry's word, the more resilient and fructus ecosystems. And then finally, recycling waste. How can we deal with contaminants in the system? And basically, they pose some ways that we can move forward here, and I'll certainly highlight a little bit the enticing new scientist. So this is all, it's a very kind of inspirational article to read and kind of galvanize it, okay, this is what we have to do in the future. But that sort of nitty-gritty side of myself, the pragmatic sort of how to get things happen side, I immediately thought, there's a disjunct here between what the great majority of professional soil scientists do and those sort of issues posed by Jansen et al. So many of you, you may be very indirectly related to one of those areas, but chances are that's not your major activity. That's what pays the bills. And it's also not what attracts students into university programs that will train them to a degree in soil science. So one of my jobs as associate dean was high school recruitment, and you very quickly find out that there are some very powerful terms that just don't resonate with high school students. So the concept of sustainability, for example, it's a very powerful concept, but a high school student has no connection with that. They're thinking very pragmatically about jobs and careers and so on, and it just doesn't really resonate with them. And you're not going to get many students signing up for a sustainability science program at university because they really don't know what it's about. Things like biodiversity, that's a pretty high-level concept to really, if you're in high school making maybe a biology class, how do you connect that? How do you get there? You know, how do you become a biodiversityist or whatever they are, right? You know, I mean, a biologist studying that. Food security, I mean, you know, a food security guard or something. Like what's the career position associated with that, right? So it's hard not to be struck to a certain degree when you read an article like Henry's, it's an excellent article, but that the aspirations for the discipline are different from those of many professional soil scientists for how they actually go about their daily work. And that's a problem, I think, for the future of soil science. And I'll argue throughout that we need to align those perhaps a little bit more in the future.